Elias Monroe survived war, outlived 2 strokes, and buried the love of his life, but none of that prepared him for the moment a stranger decided his stillness looked suspicious. He came to the pharmacy for blood pressure pills, walked the same quiet aisles he'd walked for 20 years, and still ended up staring down the barrel of a gun, not because he did anything wrong, but because someone couldn't see past his skin or his silence. There was a rhythm to Elias Monroe's mornings, not hurried, not aimless, just slow, deliberately slow, as if every footstep he placed on the earth was a quiet negotiation with time, asking it to be gentle today. At 82, Elias no longer moved like the man who once climbed steep hills in jungle boots or welded beams 3 stories above ground in blistering Georgia heat. His right knee, stiffened by shrapnel decades ago, didn't allow for much pride, but he held on to dignity like it was welded into his spine. He wasn't famous, but in the quiet neighborhoods of Lafayette, Georgia, he was known. A nodder, a helper, the man who brought fresh tomatoes from his backyard to the checkout girls every Sunday. He said little, watched everything, and always held the door open even if you were 15 steps behind him. That morning, the sky hung in soft gray layers, the kind of muted hush that made sounds carry longer and emotions sit heavier. He stepped out of his home, the screen door creaking behind him, with his neatly folded grocery list tucked between the fingers of a calloused hand. Bread, blood thinners, oatmeal, and one last item, Laverne's inhaler. She'd passed away 5 years ago, but he still refilled the prescription. Habit, or maybe something more than that. Maybe memory was more alive in small rituals than in photographs. She used to wheeze in her sleep when the rain came. He'd sit beside her, counting seconds between breaths. He didn't cry at her funeral. But every time the inhaler hissed against his palm, his throat tightened like it had something to say but never found the courage. The drive to Riverside Market was barely 12 minutes, a stretch of winding backroads and sleepy storefronts. His hands, strong but veined like old tree roots, gripped the steering wheel gently. The radio didn't play. He preferred silence when he thought. And Elias Monroe was always thinking, not about big politics or loud news, but about people. The ones who speak with their eyes, the ones who stand too long behind you in line, the ones who clutch their purses tighter than necessary. He arrived just after 7:10 a.m. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a silver truck near the cart return and a red sedan parked diagonally across 2 spots. Elias pulled into his usual space, 2 steps from the cart rack and 6 from the sliding doors. The Camry clicked into park with a sigh. Inside, the store was the way he liked it, quiet, cool, and mostly untouched by the day's noise. No overhead music yet, just the low hum of refrigeration units and the distant clink of glass bottles being shelved. He moved past the bakery, nodded to the young woman mopping near the bagels. Her name was Samantha, he remembered, and turned down aisle 3 with the soft shuffle of worn boots on linoleum. He didn't use a cane, though his daughter had bought him one. Pride was stubborn like that. When he reached the pharmacy window, Ariella, the young technician with kind eyes and thick black glasses, gave him a wave. "Morning, Mr. Monroe. Got your refill queued up, just finishing the label. You want to take a seat?" "I'll stand," he replied. "My legs complain more when I baby them." She smiled. She liked him, not in a tell me your whole life story way, but in a you make me feel safe while I work way. Elias was that kind of man. No flash, no ego, just solid ground. He stepped away from the counter slightly and leaned his weight against the cart. His hands folded neatly over the handle. He watched the greeting card section without really seeing it, eyes somewhere between memory and now. He liked the quiet here, the stillness between transactions. It reminded him of Sunday mornings before his hearing started to fade, when Laverne would sit across from him drinking tea, humming faint gospel tunes under her breath. But quiet never lasts when other people bring their noise. 3 aisles over, a man named Nate Keller watched Elias with squinted eyes and crossed arms. Off-duty, still in uniform pants and a faded department hoodie, Keller wasn't shopping. He was surveying. He didn't know Elias. All he saw was an old man in a bulky army green jacket, lingering near the pharmacy, looking around every few seconds. Keller had his reasons. Reasons rooted in something deeper than prejudice, something buried in unspoken trauma. 2 years ago, his father, also a Vietnam veteran, collapsed in a gas station parking lot while people watched and did nothing. No one helped. No one even called 911 until it was too late. That moment etched itself into Keller's bones like scripture. Now, he saw ghosts in everyone. He saw threats in stillness. Elias glanced over his shoulder once, briefly. He saw Keller. He didn't linger, but he knew the look. He'd seen it in jungles, in airports, in locker rooms, in neighborhoods that never welcomed him. Suspicion had a scent. You didn't have to speak it to smell it. 2 aisles over, Leticia Ramos, 52, watched the same interaction from a different angle. She wasn't a detective, but she noticed things others ignored. She restocked bleach bottles and fabric softener while scanning the reflection of the 2 men in the curved security mirror near aisle 5. Something wasn't right. She saw the way Keller stiffened. She saw the way Elias stood still, not scared, not confrontational, just centered. Leticia placed the last bottle on the shelf, then quietly walked to the security room. Back at the pharmacy, Ariella placed the small brown bag with Elias's medication on the counter and smiled. "All set, Mr. Monroe. Got you a 90-day supply." "You're good to me," Elias said, reaching slowly for his wallet. He moved intentionally, no sudden gestures, not with how the world worked these days. But something shifted. A sharp sound, boots on tile, fast, clipped. Then a voice, loud, sharp, quivering. "Hands up. Right now." Elias froze. He didn't turn. He didn't speak. He just raised his hands, slow, practiced, like a man who's been through worse but never stops being surprised when worse finds him again. He felt the air around him stretch thin. Felt ice. Felt judgment. And for one quiet second, before the weight of the moment crushed down, Elias whispered to himself, "Not today." There was a moment, just before Officer Nate Keller's fingers reached for the holster on his hip, when he didn't know if he was reacting to the man in front of him, or to a ghost he could never put back in the ground. He hadn't meant to follow Elias Monroe into the store. At least, that's what he told himself. It started with a glance. He'd pulled into the Riverside Market lot like he did every Thursday after his shift. Not to shop. Not really. Just to sit in his truck, let the engine tick itself cool, and drink the black coffee he didn't even like. He parked facing the entrance so he could see who came and went. Routine comfort. Pattern recognition. Part of him had never left the patrol mindset, even when he wasn't on duty. But that morning, a figure stepped out of an old Camry and walked toward the sliding doors, slow, measured, jacket zipped up tight even though the weather barely touched 60. There was something deliberate about the way he moved, as though each step was weighed before being taken. He didn't fumble with keys or shuffle through pockets. He walked with intention. That's what caught Nate's attention. Because men who walk like that, in his experience, were either highly disciplined or hiding something. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel. Something about that jacket, army green, heavy, military style, stirred a feeling in Nate that he couldn't name, but he knew how it felt. Like gravity bending in the wrong direction. He wasn't paranoid. He was prepared. At least, that's what his father used to say. Back when Nate Keller was just a kid growing up in rural Calhoun County, his father was his North Star. A Vietnam veteran who walked with a limp but never lost his edge. He taught Nate how to clean a rifle before he turned 12, how to drive stick, how to read a man's silence before you ever trust his words. And then one day, that man, Nate's unshakable father, collapsed in a Circle K parking lot and died with nobody watching. The security camera caught him clutching his chest near the windshield squeegees. Cars drove by. A couple came out holding soda cups, glanced at him, then walked off laughing. By the time someone called for help, it was too late. The man who taught him to be vigilant had died because people didn't care enough to look closer. Since then, Nate had never stopped looking. And now he was staring at the back of a man who looked too calm, too still, wearing a military jacket too similar to the one his father used to wear. He got out of his truck, slowly at first, then faster than he realized. His heart was already pulling ahead of his judgment. Not fear, not exactly. Something messier. Like sorrow dressed in authority. He pushed through the grocery store doors, ignoring the glance from the older security guard posted near the carts. He didn't speak to anyone, just scanned the aisles. When he saw Elias standing near the pharmacy, no bags, no cart, no movement, his breath caught. To Nate, the scene didn't read as peaceful. It read as staged. A man standing that still was waiting. For what? He moved closer, slowly at first. His fingers brushed against the butt of his weapon. He hadn't pulled it yet. Not completely. But it was there, within reach. The closer he got, the louder the thoughts. What if he's watching? What if this is a setup? What if this man has a weapon under that jacket? It didn't matter that no one was screaming. It didn't matter that the pharmacy tech was chatting casually with him just moments before. Nate didn't see context. He saw patterns. The same patterns he trained to see. The same patterns his father died because no one else noticed. And yet, something in Nate's gut turned cold. Because the man wasn't running. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even tense. He was still. That kind of stillness, the kind that doesn't flinch even when you approach from behind, unnerved Nate more than any raised voice ever had. He stepped forward and cleared his throat, but his voice betrayed him. It came out too loud. Too sharp. Hands up. Right now. The command cracked across the air like a whip, cutting through the low hum of the store. The man, Elias, did not yell. He did not reach. He did not speak. He just raised his hands, calmly, like he'd done it before. Like he knew the steps to this song. And for a moment, Nate's vision narrowed. The edges of the world blurred, like he was watching something through a broken scope. To anyone else, the image was clear, a confused old man complying with a frightened cop. But to Nate, the image was fragmented, overlaid with the memory of his father gripping his chest, alone in a parking lot. He felt the weight of his father's dog tags, the ones he now wore under his shirt, pressing hard against his collarbone. He didn't want to be wrong. He couldn't afford to be wrong. Because if he was, then maybe he had been wrong before. Maybe he was carrying more ghosts than medals. "Don't move," he said again, but the words lacked certainty. Elias's eyes met his, not with defiance, but with tired comprehension. Like he'd been here before. Like this moment wasn't about Nate at all. And that's what undid him. Not the words. The stillness. The complete absence of fear. The understanding that passed silently between them. The kind that can only come from men who've seen too much and trust too little. Nate didn't lower his weapon. Not yet. But for the first time, he saw himself from the outside. Not a protector. Not even a threat. Just a man in a grocery store, pointing a loaded weapon at someone who had only come for medication. His hands began to sweat. His mouth went dry. He heard footsteps behind him, but he didn't turn. The voices of other shoppers floated in. Questions, confusion, the scraping of carts being pushed aside. Still, he didn't move. Because once you step across that line, the line between caution and conviction, it's hard to know how to step back. He didn't know it yet, but the standoff would end not with a struggle, not with force, but with something far more dangerous to a man like Nate Keller. It would end with clarity. The sound didn't echo, it expanded. The officer's voice, sharp and shaking, didn't just hang in the air, it filled every crack in the quiet grocery store with a new kind of silence, the kind that people feel in their ribs before they understand what's happening. Somewhere near the back freezer, a shopping basket hit the ground. A little girl clutched her mother's leg, pulling her toward the bread aisle without knowing why. And in the floral section, an elderly woman slowly backed away from the tulips she had just finished admiring. In the center of it all, under the cold store lights that suddenly felt too harsh, Elias Monroe stood still, hands raised, heart steady, body aching but balanced. His legs had grown stiff from standing too long, but he didn't shift his weight. The younger officer's hands were clenched tightly around his weapon. His voice had grown quiet now, almost lost in the electricity of unease buzzing through the aisles. Elias kept his eyes locked on the man's face. Not his gun. Not the badge. Just his eyes. They looked younger than the voice. Younger than the weight behind the weapon. Not cruel, not angry, just frayed. Like someone gripping the last thread of belief that he was doing something right. And around them, the store had paused. Not stopped. Not frozen. Just paused. Because the world knows how to hold its breath when it's scared to exhale. From aisle 6, hidden partly by a towering shelf of boxed noodles, Jamie Lewin, 17, leaned cautiously around the edge. He hadn't meant to see it. He came early that morning to restock the granola bars before the regulars arrived. That was the agreement. His hours were early, his paycheck was small, and his mother reminded him daily that showing up on time was better than showing up perfect. Jamie didn't consider himself brave. He wasn't outspoken. He stuttered when he got nervous. He preferred books to people. But in that moment, as he saw the officer's stance, rigid but uncertain, and the older man's arms lifted without flinch, he felt something settle in his chest. Something heavy and warm. Not fear. Not even anger. Something deeper. Something like mourning for a truth too familiar to name. He didn't reach for his phone. Not yet. He just watched. He knew that voice. He recognized Mr. Monroe. He'd bagged his groceries twice last week. The man had asked about his college plans. Not with pity. Just with curiosity. Like it mattered. And now, that same man stood motionless while a badge pointed a weapon at his chest like caution could be shaped into bullets. Jamie crouched lower. Not out of fear, but because his knees had started to shake. Near the deli counter, Yvonne Carter, 66, wrapped her hands tightly around the metal bar of her shopping cart. Her loaf of wheat bread sat alone inside, forgotten. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just watched, chest rising and falling in controlled, deliberate breaths. Yvonne had worked as a trauma nurse for 30 years. She'd seen people arrive on gurneys whispering prayers and bleeding from places they didn't know existed. She'd seen fear take many shapes, the panicked, the numb, the frozen. But what she saw on Elias's face wasn't fear. It was preparation. The kind of quiet bracing a man does when he's not sure what version of the world he's waking up into. Yvonne had known Elias in passing. They lived only 6 blocks apart. She saw him at the post office, at Sunday service, sometimes trimming his roses in the yard with an old pair of gardening scissors. She knew his wife had passed. She knew he brought food to the shut-ins at church even when no one asked him to. She knew his voice was always low, always polite. And now, she watched him stand still under a gun held by a man who didn't know a single thing about him. Her feet began to move before her head made a decision. Near the registers, Malik, the store's security guard, stood by the entrance. He was 58, thick-boned, quiet by nature. His uniform shirt was too tight across the shoulders, and his left eye sagged slightly from a stroke years back. He had seen many things in his years: shoplifters, angry parents, counterfeit coupons, even a customer having a seizure near the juice cooler. But nothing like this. He wasn't armed. That wasn't part of the job. He wasn't trained for this either, at least not officially. So he watched. He looked at Elias, then at the officer's stance. Then at the frozen shoppers hovering behind shelves and crates of oranges like shadows afraid to speak. He didn't step forward. But he didn't look away. He wouldn't be the kind of man who looked away. And in the produce aisle, a hand gripped a shopping basket filled with oranges and oatmeal. Lenny Dixon, 68, short, wiry, with a posture still stiff from army drills, narrowed his eyes. He knew that face. He knew Elias Monroe. They had shared stories once over black coffee and chess. They hadn't served in the same unit overseas, but their paths had overlapped. Lenny remembered a firefight in 1972, hot sun, burning sky, mortar shells falling like thunder. He remembered Elias dragging 2 men out from under wreckage while shouting for backup. Now here he was, the same man, standing with arms raised inside a grocery store, while another man pointed a weapon at his chest like war had returned in a different uniform. Lenny didn't say anything. Not yet. But his body turned slightly. Feet planted. Shoulders firm. If the officer twitched, if the barrel moved even an inch forward, Lenny would step in. No one spoke. No one screamed. But something was unraveling. Not the crowd. Not the silence. The officer. His breathing grew louder to himself, drowned to everyone else by the weight of unspoken questions. Why wasn't the man moving? Why weren't they afraid? Why wasn't this going the way he imagined? Because in every training scenario, the threat shouted. The threat ran. The threat resisted. But Elias stood still. Not in defiance. Not in surrender. Just still. Ariella, behind the pharmacy window, reached for the store phone and paused. Her hand hovered over the buttons. She had always felt safe behind that glass. But not today. Not because of Elias. Because of what people become when they misunderstand a moment. She had seen it in customers. In teachers. In her own father. Sometimes the wrong person gets scared. And fear, when it wears the wrong face, becomes violence waiting for permission. And still, Elias didn't move. He blinked once. His arms had started to shake, not from fear but fatigue. He shifted his weight just slightly, enough to keep balance. He looked at the officer again. Then he spoke, not loudly, not urgently. "Son," he said, voice gravel-soft, "I'm not what you think I am." No response. No gesture. Just the creak of the store settling into itself. And dozens of eyes that stayed. Because sometimes, the bravest thing people do is keep watching when the world wants them to look away. The gun hadn't lowered. The crowd hadn't moved. But something had shifted, not in noise, not in posture, but in air itself. The stillness wasn't hollow anymore. It had shape now and weight, like a breath held too long. Elias Monroe felt it in his joints, in the bend of his knees and the subtle ache rising up his back from standing too long in a locked position. But he didn't drop his arms. Not yet. The shaking had started not from fear, but from time, because time demands payment even from men who survive war. And across from him, the officer still held his weapon level, too high, too tense, like it was the only thing keeping the floor from falling out beneath him. Elias watched his eyes. The boy, because that's how he looked now, younger by the second, blinked more often. His jaw twitched. Sweat pooled beneath his collar, spreading like panic down his spine. But still, he didn't speak. And neither did anyone else. Until they did. The first voice did not shout. It did not thunder or shake shelves. It simply came from the side, quiet but firm, like someone opening a window in a room that had gone stale. "That man's name is Elias Monroe." The words didn't echo. They just landed. The officer flinched slightly, his eyes darting toward the sound. It came from Yvonne, still gripping her cart near the edge of the cereal aisle. Her shoulders were squared, her voice steady. She didn't approach. She didn't raise her hands. She just stood there, not as a witness, but as a barrier. "I'm a trauma nurse," she said, louder this time. "Retired. I know what fear looks like. And I know what stillness means." The officer's grip on the weapon tightened, but his voice didn't come. "You're aiming that gun at a man who lives 4 streets from here," she continued. "He brings tomatoes to my neighbor's porch every Sunday. He walks with a limp because he served this country before you were even born. That jacket you're afraid of? He earned it." No movement. No command. But something in the room exhaled. Elias didn't glance toward Yvonne, but the corner of his lip tightened, just slightly, a signal, barely visible, that he heard her. That she mattered. The officer swallowed hard. His eyes flicked from Elias's hands to his face, then to the people standing still behind cereal boxes and dairy shelves. Every direction he turned, there were eyes, not frantic, not protesting, just waiting. Watching. And then came the second voice. It came from the left, near the cold case. "His wife used to leave flowers on my grandmother's grave," said Letitia, her voice lower but just as clear. "He never asked for anything. Just gave, quietly like people used to." She stepped forward now, slowly, keeping her hands visible but calm. Her janitor's vest caught a beam of light from the skylight overhead. It looked like armor, even though it was polyester. "You don't know what you're doing, officer," she added, gentler now. "But you know it's not right." The officer didn't move. But his elbows softened, not lowered, not released, just softened. At the end of aisle 4, behind a row of jars filled with off-brand pasta sauce, Jamie Lewin remained crouched, one hand pressed flat to the ground to steady his nerves. His throat had gone dry. He'd never spoken in front of a room full of strangers before. Not even in class. But something about the silence made him feel responsible for filling it. He slowly rose, knees popping, His chest was tight. His palms itched. He took a deep breath. And then, voice cracking, unsure but rooted in something deeper than confidence, he spoke. "He talks to me about college," Jamie said. "Every time he's here. He asks what I'm reading, tells me to take my time, to breathe before I answer." Every head turned. Jamie didn't hide. He didn't shrink. He stepped out into the open, brown skin flushed, eyes wide but determined. "That's not the kind of man who waits by the pharmacy to cause trouble," he said. "That's the kind who waits because that's what men like him do. They wait. They wait because the world always gives them a reason to be patient." The words fell like soft stones into still water. Ripples. The officer blinked again. His hands were still up. The barrel still aimed. But his chest rose faster now. The sweat had reached the base of his neck. His feet shifted. Just slightly. But enough to let the world know that the posture was cracking. Elias hadn't spoken since his quiet declaration, "I'm not what you think I am." But now, his voice returned. Measured. Painfully human. "I know that look in your eyes," he said to the officer. "You're not looking at me. You're looking at a memory. Someone else. Somewhere else." The officer's lips parted, but no sound came. "You think you're stopping something," Elias said. "But you're just carrying it forward." He slowly lowered his arms, not all the way, just a few inches. Enough to shift the balance. Enough to turn the tension into something breakable. "If you need to be right," Elias said, "you're going to pull that trigger. But if you're ready to be honest, you're going to put that gun away." For a long time, no one moved. No one coughed. Even the humming freezers seemed quieter. Then, from the far end of the store, another presence stepped forward. Lenny, stiff-backed and holding a half-empty basket, stood with the kind of authority that didn't come from volume, but from history. The kind of man who knew what it meant to bury friends before their names were engraved in stone. "Lower it, son," he said, plain and clear. "You're shaking and I don't want to watch you live with what comes next." The officer's hands trembled now, visibly. His eyes scanned the room. Faces, corners, quiet truths gathering in every direction. His fingers relaxed. Slowly, 1 inch at a time, the weapon descended, not dropped, not thrown, but released with the fragile dignity of someone realizing too late that they were never in control. The barrel pointed downward. Elias exhaled. Not deeply. Just enough. No one applauded. No one cheered. But something invisible had broken, and something heavier had been allowed to fall. The silence didn't end. It changed. It became understanding. The barrel no longer pointed at his chest, but Elias Monroe didn't lower his eyes. He didn't breathe any easier, and he didn't shake his arms loose from their stiffness. Relief doesn't always arrive on time. Sometimes it walks slowly, just like he did. The young officer still stood in front of him, gun lowered now, but his face was caught in a paralysis more profound than fear, the look of someone waking from a dream they believed was real, only to realize they had spoken out loud in it. His mouth opened slightly, but words wouldn't form. Around them, no one cheered. There were no gasps, no tears, no collapse into hugs or safety. Just the hushed acknowledgement that the moment had shifted, and no one knew what to do next. Elias finally let his hands fall to his sides. He rubbed his right wrist, slow and quiet, a small act of reclamation. His shoulder ached. His knees throbbed. He felt each beat of his pulse in the back of his neck. He turned to the pharmacy counter. Ariella hadn't moved. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with recognition, that she had just watched something unravel that no textbook, no customer service training, and no memo from corporate could have prepared her for. She slid the small brown prescription bag across the counter. Her hand lingered on it, not because she needed to, but because it felt wrong to let go too quickly. Elias stepped forward. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a joke. He just nodded, took the bag and placed it in the basket of his cart. Then he looked at her, not as a customer, but as a man trying to offer something steady in a room still wobbling. "I appreciate your patience," he said, voice low. Ariella said nothing. Her throat was too tight. The officer still hadn't moved. His name was Nate Keller, but no one in the room knew that yet. His fingers twitched at his sides. His weapon was now holstered, the weight of it pressing into his hip like a mistake too close to forget. He looked around the store. He didn't see hostility. He saw stillness, again but different now. Not the quiet of suspicion, but the silence of watching someone crumble without anyone touching them. Lenny had stepped back. Yvonne stood with her hand resting lightly on her cardigan. Jamie was gone from the aisle, retreating behind the shelves like the air had thinned. And Elias was no longer looking at him. That stung more than anything. Because in Nate's world, authority was the anchor. Respect was the echo that came after a command. And now, he stood surrounded by people who had obeyed nothing and still managed to be right. He turned, slow, and walked toward the exit. Every step sounded louder than it should have. As he passed Letitia, she said nothing. She just stood with her arms crossed, eyes following him like a ledger being balanced. At the front, Malik opened the exit gate, didn't speak, didn't nod, didn't make him feel seen or unseen. Just opened the gate. And then the door hissed open, and Nate stepped out into the light that felt too bright for the hour. Back inside, Elias reached into his pocket for his list. It was still folded, still warm from the grip of his hand during the standoff. He read it again. Blood thinners. Inhaler. His hands weren't shaking, but they felt older now, heavier than when he arrived. He looked toward the bread aisle. It felt like a different country from where he stood. Like it had moved further away while time bent around him. He pushed the cart forward. Each wheel turned with a subtle squeak. The sound cut through the new stillness like a reminder that the world keeps going, even if your spirit wants to sit down for a moment and catch up. As he passed the dairy section, a woman stepped aside to let him through. She didn't make eye contact. But she didn't turn away either. People were still watching. Still processing. No one was whispering. No one was pointing. There was just space, respectfully wide, but not isolating. He stopped near the oatmeal, leaned down with a quiet grunt, and picked up the brand Laverne used to like. It wasn't on sale, but that didn't matter today. He turned the corner toward the bread aisle and paused. Jamie was there. The boy was pretending to restock a box of granola bars, but his hands were trembling slightly, and his face was too flushed to hide what had just happened. Elias didn't say anything. He just stopped beside him and gently placed a loaf of whole wheat in the cart. Jamie looked up, unsure. "You held your ground," Elias said, barely above a whisper. "Sometimes, that's all a man can do." Jamie nodded. The lump in his throat made speaking impossible. Elias reached out and gave the boy's shoulder a firm squeeze. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't a blessing. It was something older, something passed between men who had seen too much too early. By the time Elias made it to the checkout, the line had formed again. Small conversations had resumed. Carts moved. Items scanned. But it all moved slower than before, as if everyone was relearning how to occupy space beside each other. Samantha at the register smiled faintly as she took his items. Her voice cracked when she said hello, so she didn't say much after that. Just scanned, bagged, and offered the same kindness he'd always shown her. When he reached for his wallet, she paused. "The manager said it's covered," she said. Elias looked at her, eyes calm but firm. "I don't need a favor," he replied. "Just a receipt." She nodded and took the bill from the side printer. He paid in cash. Coins clinked softly into the tray. He gathered his bags, all three, and placed them into his cart with the care of someone building something small but important. As he walked out, the automatic doors parted slowly. The morning light hit his face. He didn't squint, didn't rush, didn't look back. He just walked, slow, deliberate, the same way he walked in, but with the added weight of every eye that had seen too much in the past 10 minutes. Out in the lot, across from his car, a man stood watching him. Older, but heavy-set, wearing a baseball cap with a faded flag stitched into the front. He didn't speak. He didn't wave. But when Elias opened his car door, the man nodded. Not in pity. Not in apology. In recognition. The kind that means, "I saw that. I'll carry it too." Elias got in, started the engine, and let it hum. He didn't drive off right away. He sat there for a long minute. Both hands on the wheel. Eyes forward. Letting the world catch its breath. The apartment was dark when Nate Keller stepped inside. Not because the lights were off, but because nothing felt illuminated anymore. The overhead bulb flickered briefly before stabilizing, casting a low yellow glow across the walls, the kind of color that makes everything inside look older than it is. He dropped his keys onto the counter too fast. They clattered, hit the edge, and fell to the floor. He didn't pick them up. He stood in the middle of the room, hands at his sides, like a man who had just walked out of a place where the rules stopped working. He could still feel the grip of his holster pressing into his hip, still feel the imprint of sweat under his vest even though he had peeled it off an hour ago in the parking lot. But more than anything, he could still feel the weight of the stare. Not from Elias Monroe. That was the part that troubled him most. It wasn't the older man's eyes that haunted him. It was his stillness. That unbearable, grounded stillness. Like someone who had been down this road before and already knew where it ended. Nate moved to the sink, turned on the faucet, and splashed cold water on his face. It didn't help. It didn't jolt him awake or make him feel cleaner. The image in the mirror above the kitchen counter looked nothing like the man he had tried to become. His reflection didn't lie. It just showed what he had ignored. Eyes red-rimmed, jaw locked too tight, skin pale not from fear, but from the emotional exhaustion of holding a posture for too long that never really belonged to him. He had trained for emergencies, memorized procedures, sat through seminars and field exercises and even the trauma-informed policing course last spring. But none of those sessions taught you how to put a weapon back in its holster when your mind was still trying to protect a ghost. He sat down at the edge of the couch, not really intending to, but the weight in his legs gave out like an old bridge finally giving way beneath too much traffic. The apartment was silent. Too silent. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, the kind that feels like a sentence waiting to be read aloud. Across the room, the photo still hung by the bookshelf. A picture of his father in uniform, flanked by two laughing Marines, all of them standing ankle-deep in muddy water, beer cans in hand. His father's smile in that photo was different. Bigger. Unburdened. Nate had always kept it there, positioned so he could see it from the couch, the kitchen, and the front door. It used to center him. Now it stared back like a question. He got up, crossed the room, and pulled the photo from the wall. Dust had gathered along the top edge. He wiped it with his sleeve and held it in both hands like something too fragile to carry, but too familiar to put down. "You'd know what to do," he whispered. But the words sounded hollow, even to him. He walked to the balcony, opened the sliding glass door, and let the cool air hit his face. It was barely past noon, but the sun sat low behind the clouds, casting long shadows across the apartment parking lot. A woman across the way was helping her toddler onto a tricycle. 2 floors down, someone smoked a cigarette in silence, their gaze locked on the distance. No one looked up at him. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't want to be seen. Nate wasn't afraid of being punished. He wasn't even sure if he'd be disciplined at all. No shots were fired. No damage done, technically. No blood on the floor. But he had come face to face with something far harder to escape than a tribunal or a transfer. He had come face to face with the possibility that his instincts were broken. That somewhere along the line, what he learned to interpret as threat had become a warped reflection of something unhealed inside himself. He kept seeing his father. Not the man in the photo. The one slumped on grainy gas station footage, dying alone. And so every quiet person became a potential danger. Every still man was a gathering storm. And yet Elias Monroe hadn't shouted. Hadn't run. Hadn't even trembled. He had looked him in the eyes, not as a challenge, but as a mirror. That's what was so devastating. Elias hadn't tried to defend himself. He hadn't tried to prove anything. He had simply waited, like he already knew that survival came down to staying still long enough for someone else to come to their senses. And that someone had been Nate. His phone vibrated on the coffee table. He didn't move to answer it. He didn't want to talk to his supervisor. He didn't want to answer questions. He didn't want to explain what he couldn't yet explain to himself. He walked back inside, placed the photo gently on the counter, and stood in the middle of the living room, unsure what to do with his hands. Eventually, he sat again. He thought about calling someone, a friend, an old academy classmate, but what would he say? I pointed a gun at a man because he reminded me of my father? No one teaches you how to admit that out loud. He opened the drawer in the hallway table and pulled out the notepad he used sometimes, mostly for grocery lists, to-do items, odd reminders. But today, he opened to a blank page. He wrote, "I didn't see him. Not really. I saw fear wearing his jacket. I saw silence and assumed it was danger. But he was waiting, not for me, for the world to figure out that he didn't owe it an explanation." He stopped, let the pen rest between his fingers. Then he tore out the page, folded it twice, and left it on the table. Not for anyone else. Just for himself. Just so he wouldn't forget. As the light in the apartment dimmed and the air inside cooled, Nate sat alone with no uniform, no badge, no gun on his hip. Just a man reckoning with the realization that fear, when left unexamined, becomes something indistinguishable from power. And that sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do is forget to ask who you're really aiming at, before your hands ever touch the trigger. The screen door creaked open like it always did. Not loud, but persistent, the kind of sound that carried across a lifetime. Elias stepped over the welcome mat that had long since faded from sun and time. The word, home, was still printed across it, though the edges had curled and the corners refused to lie flat. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did, but chose not to. Inside, the living room smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. The curtains hung the way his wife had left them, half drawn, tilted open just enough for the morning to trickle in without being overwhelming. She used to say the world was too harsh all at once. That light should come like a whisper, not a demand. Elias stood in the doorway, not because he was tired, but because stepping all the way in felt like a decision he hadn't made yet. There was a silence inside the house that didn't belong to fear, but to memory. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the weight of everything left unsaid, and of everything already known too well to need saying. He set the small pharmacy bag on the dining table. The receipt peeked out, curling like a ribbon. A half-dozen eggs. Lisinopril. That's all he needed. That's all he had wanted. He sank into the chair at the table, not the one he always used, but the one she used to sit in. Just to be closer. Her chair still faced the window, angled slightly, a habit she never dropped. She liked watching the neighbors walk their dogs, or the wind shifting through the sycamore branches out front. Elias watched too, but all he saw now was the motion of a world that had, just moments ago, nearly erased him. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a photo. It was crinkled on the edges from years of being moved from wallet to drawer to jacket. In the picture, he stood next to her, Gloria, her eyes sharp as glass and kind as scripture. They were young, younger than most couples made it out of the war as. His arm was wrapped around her, too tight. He remembered how she had teased him about that afterward. "Boy, you look like you were afraid I'd disappear between flashes." Maybe he had been. He held the photo in both hands now, eyes lingering on her smile, then placed it gently on the table in front of him. "I didn't raise my voice," he said into the room. No one answered. But he wasn't expecting one. "I didn't even move," he added, not with pride, but with a kind of tired certainty. "But somehow that made me dangerous anyway." The chair across from him, hers, seemed to tilt toward him slightly, like it was still listening. He imagined her hand there, on the wood. Her palms steady. Her gaze, firmer than any courtroom. Gloria would have known what to say. But he wasn't sure he wanted to hear it. Because it might start with the truth. That surviving had become second nature to him. And second nature always comes with scars too deep to see unless you're looking from the inside. He stood and walked to the bookshelf in the hallway, the one stacked with paperbacks, sermon notes, and 2 shoeboxes full of letters he hadn't reread in years. He reached up and pulled down the wooden box from the top shelf, the one with the broken hinge and the smell of cedar inside. He opened it slowly, like someone lifting the lid on their own silence. Inside were his medals. 4 of them. Untouched. He lifted one, the bronze star, and turned it over in his hand. It was heavier than he remembered. Maybe because now he had a clearer understanding of what it didn't protect you from. For a long time, he had believed that uniform meant safety. Not immunity, but at least some form of acknowledgement. But the truth had settled in his chest like cold iron. It didn't matter what you wore, not if they couldn't see you. And today, in that moment, in that store, no one had seen him. Not the man who had risked his life on foreign soil. Not the man who had carried his brother's body back across a battlefield and written the letter to his mother. Not the man who had built cabinets for 30 years and never once missed a shift. They had seen something else. The threat. A stranger. A shadow. He closed the box and carried it to the table. Sat back down and placed the medal beside the photo. The room stayed still. Not peaceful, reflective. That kind of quiet where a man counts the versions of himself that the world has chosen to forget. It wasn't rage that filled Elias. It wasn't sadness either. It was something older. More patient. The kind of knowing that comes when you've lived through decades of warnings your mother whispered under her breath, through whispered instructions about how to lower your tone in public, how to keep your hands in view, how to soften yourself for people who have already decided you're sharp. It was that long, slow ache of recognition. That he hadn't been targeted because of something he did, but because of who he was allowed to become in the minds of others. And for some, that image never stretched far enough to include kindness, wisdom, or stillness. He stood again, walked to the kitchen and filled the kettle. As it boiled, he prepared 2 mugs like he used to. Habit. One with sugar. One without. He set hers on the table anyway. Let the steam rise into the space between memory and conversation. Then he sat down again. And spoke softly. "Gloria, I stayed calm," he said, like he had to prove it even now. "I stayed calm because anything else would have given him permission." His voice didn't crack, but his hand trembled slightly as he reached for the mug. "I didn't flinch, not because I'm brave, but because we don't get the luxury of being misunderstood twice." Outside, the branches stirred. Somewhere, a car engine idled. The world moved like it always had, without waiting. But inside the home of Elias Monroe, time pressed its back against the doorframe and paused. Not in mourning, not in fear, but in reverence for the man who had made it home, again, without needing a wound to prove it. The first knock came soft, like someone trying to be sure they weren't interrupting anything important. The kind of knock you give when the person inside might be sleeping, praying, or simply not ready to answer. Elias sat in the same chair by the window, still nursing the second cup of tea he had poured hours earlier. It had gone lukewarm by now, the steam long vanished, but he hadn't the mind to refresh it. Not yet. The knock came again, firmer this time, but still polite. Familiar. He rose slowly, one hand pressing against his back for support. The ache had returned, dull but persistent, reminding him that the body never quite forgets what it's carried, no matter how much the heart tries to pretend otherwise. As he opened the door, the afternoon light spilled into the room, golden and patient. And standing beneath that light, one hand holding an envelope and the other shoved awkwardly into his pocket, was Lyle Bennett. "Eli," Lyle said, voice lower than Elias remembered, like it had settled into his bones over the years. "Didn't know if I should come by. But I figured you might need a porch conversation today." Elias blinked, then gave a nod so slight it almost didn't register. "You always did show up after the storm," he said, stepping aside without invitation. Lyle smiled, that same sideways smile that always looked like it came with a secret. "That's how I stay dry." They sat on the porch, the old wooden swing groaning beneath their weight like it remembered them both. Lyle leaned forward, forearms on his knees, envelope still in his hand. Elias stayed upright, one arm resting on the porch rail, eyes on the street that hadn't changed in decades. They sat in silence for a long time. Not because they didn't have words, but because the air was thick with the ones they hadn't said in years. "You heard?" Elias asked eventually. Lyle nodded. "Course I did. Pastor Williams called me soon as it happened. Said you were calm like stone. That you didn't flinch." Elias turned slightly. "I wasn't trying to be brave, Lyle. I was trying to stay alive." The words hung there, heavier than either of them could touch. "I know," Lyle replied. And he did. They had grown up 3 houses apart, played in the same dusty field behind the Baptist church, fished in the same creek that had since dried up into memory. They'd been drafted 6 months apart, sent overseas within the same year. But when they returned, something had split them, not loudly, not violently, just in the quiet, invisible way that war divides men without explanation. "Remember when your daddy used to holler at us for tracking mud into his porch?" First, Elias chuckled, low and surprised. He'd shout like we'd brought the whole swamp inside. He used to say, "This house is clean because I earned clean. You don't walk through it with dirty feet." Elias nodded, a small smile creeping onto his face. He was a man who believed in thresholds. They both sat with that memory, softening beneath it. Lyle glanced at the envelope in his hand, then offered it up. "I brought this for you. You don't have to read it now. It's just something I wrote after I saw the report." Elias didn't take it immediately. His eyes scanned the paper edges, then looked back at Lyle. "You were always better with your voice than your pen." Lyle shrugged. "Maybe. But some things don't sound right out loud." Elias took the envelope and placed it beside him on the swing. He didn't open it. The street beyond the porch was quiet, save for the occasional passing car and the distant bark of a restless dog. Children's bikes leaned against fences. Wind moved through branches like a whisper. It was the kind of neighborhood that always looked calm from the outside, even when the inside was burning. "You know what Gloria used to say?" Elias asked suddenly. "She said the hardest part of growing old is watching the world forget your shape. Like you become background in your own life." Lyle looked at him. "She wasn't wrong. She kept trying to get me to write things down," Elias continued. "Said someday, Jackson would want to know who I was before my hair turned white." "He will," Lyle said. "And not just from what happened in that store." Elias shook his head, a sharp exhale leaving his lungs. "But that's the story people will remember. Not me fixing roofs for the church. Not me paying for Deshawn's books when his mama couldn't. Not the time I spent sitting next to Gloria when her hands got too shaky to hold her teacup." "Then tell them that," Lyle said. "Tell them yourself." Elias turned to face him, brows tight. "And who's listening, Lyle? Who listens to old black men unless we're singing, preaching, or dying?" There was pain in his voice. Not rage, not heat, but the kind of hurt that's been carried too long, packed neat into the corners of your chest so nobody sees it spilling out. Lyle didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small photograph, yellowed at the edges, folded once down the middle. It was a picture of them, 1972. Elias, Lyle, and Jermel, the third of their childhood trio, standing outside the VA building with medals clutched in their hands and nothing else in their pockets. "I kept this all these years," Lyle said, "because it reminds me what survival looked like when we still thought it meant something." Elias looked at the photo, eyes tracing the younger version of himself. He barely recognized that man. Wide shoulders, crooked smile, eyes not yet dimmed by the things he'd learned about his own country. "I used to think surviving was enough," Elias said, voice low. "But now, I'm not sure what it means to survive if nobody remembers what you lived through." "You're wrong," Lyle said gently. "You think you're background, but you're the frame, Eli. You're the reason some of us are still standing straight." Elias didn't respond, but his eyes misted, just enough for the light to catch it. They sat together a while longer, not chasing conversation, just sharing the air. Eventually, Lyle stood. "I'll be by next Thursday," he said. "Bring some of that chess you always talk about but never back up." "You bring the checkers board and I'll still beat you with it," Elias replied dryly. Lyle smiled. And then he was gone, walking down the path with a limp that time had left behind like a bookmark in his spine. Elias sat alone again. But it didn't feel quite the same as before. He looked down at the envelope Lyle had left, hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Written in blocky handwriting were just a few lines. "I was in that store once, with you, a long time ago. You helped me read the labels when my eyes gave up. No one noticed then, but I never forgot. You've always been steady, Elias. You've always been the man I hoped to become." Elias folded the letter slowly and placed it beside the photograph Lyle had left. Then, without a word, he stood, walked to the living room, and placed both on the small shelf beneath Gloria's portrait. She was still smiling there, caught in time, her hand curled gently at her side. Elias looked at her face, then whispered just loud enough for the room to hear it. "I'm still here." And this time he said it not like a survivor, but like a man who knew what it meant to be seen. Finally, fully, even if only by a few. Sunday morning arrived slow and gold-tinted, with the kind of soft light that wrapped around rooftops and crept gently down the church walls like an old hymn returning home. Elias hadn't planned on going. His suit had remained untouched in the back of the closet for weeks, still draped in its plastic covering, shoulders beginning to sag beneath the weight of time and dust. He hadn't heard the choir in a month, hadn't shaken hands at the door or poured coffee into styrofoam cups in the community hall. He wasn't avoiding it, he told himself. He was just measuring the distance between what used to be and what was now. But that morning, something shifted. He had slept only a few hours, haunted not by nightmares, but by silence. Not the dangerous kind, like the one in the store where stillness felt like a mistake, but a silence that stared at him from across the room like a question with no punctuation. By 7 a.m., the kettle had hissed its familiar call, and Elias found himself brushing lint from the shoulders of his jacket, the same dark gray one Gloria had once said made him look like he had somewhere important to be. He still did. He just hadn't felt like it in a while. By 8:15, Elias was walking up the stone steps of Shiloh Baptist, cane in hand, not because he needed it, but because it made people less nervous to see him with it now. The old brick building stood as it always had, humble and firm, its white steeple poking modestly into the sky like a prayer it didn't shout. A few voices echoed from inside, someone practicing a song too early, pews creaking under the weight of first arrivals, a child's footsteps tapping quickly against the tiled floor. The foyer smelled of floor polish and vanilla candles. Familiar. The bulletin board still displayed last month's announcements, and the donation box had that same crack near the lock that Deacon Hill never seemed in a rush to fix. Elias took his seat at the back. Not because he wanted to hide, but because it gave him space to watch without being watched. He was always better at studying people from a distance than taking in their concern up close. Some recognized him. They nodded quietly. A few smiled. No one asked him what happened. And he was grateful. The service began with soft music, a piano and one voice, just Sister Lynette singing, "His Eye is on the Sparrow," without vibrato, without drama, just plain and tender. It was the same song Gloria used to hum while folding laundry. Elias closed his eyes. For a moment he let it carry him. Not to the store, not to the moment he stood beneath that officer's stare, but to simpler frames of life. His wife watering the garden, his granddaughter falling asleep on the couch, the way Sunday sun used to slide across the floor and warm the pages of the books they left open by mistake. He wasn't thinking about fear anymore. He was thinking about stillness that wasn't dangerous. He was thinking about peace, the kind that didn't ask for permission. After the benediction, Elias waited for the crowd to thin. He knew how to avoid the circle of well-meaning questions. He smiled softly at the deacons, shook the pastor's hand, and made his way to the side door that led to the community hall. He wanted to see the plaque. 2 years ago, the church had surprised him by placing a small bronze plate above the cupboard near the back kitchen that read, "The Monroe Shelf," because Elias never let a cupboard go empty. It wasn't a grand gesture. Just a thank you. But it meant more to him than medals ever did. As he reached the hallway, he heard a soft voice behind him. "Excuse me, sir?" Turned. A boy, no older than 11, stood there. Neat part in his hair. Dress shirt slightly oversized. Shoes polished within an inch of their life. A paper bulletin folded in his hand like a map he wasn't sure how to read. "Yes?" Elias asked, tone gentle but guarded. "Are you Mr. Monroe?" Elias nodded. The boy shifted awkwardly, looked down, then looked up again. "My dad told me what happened. He said you didn't even yell." Elias exhaled slowly. "That's right." The boy fidgeted, twisting the corner of the bulletin between his fingers. "My name's Dorian," he said. "I wanted to ask, were you scared?" The question sat between them, plain and open. Not a trick. Not a setup. Just curiosity without weight. Elias paused. Then he motioned to the bench near the water fountain. "Sit a minute." Dorian obeyed, shoulders stiff like he expected to be corrected. Elias lowered himself beside him, hands resting over the cane that he now treated more like a prop than a crutch. Scared, he repeated. Yes. But not the way people think. Dorian looked up at him, waiting. I wasn't scared of dying, Elias said. I've met that fear already, overseas and in hospital rooms and when Gloria got sick. He looked down at his hands. I was scared of becoming invisible. Of them looking at me and not seeing a man. Just a silhouette. Just an assumption. Dorian nodded slowly, like he understood more than a boy should. My uncle, he said. He got stopped once. Just for driving. Said the cop didn't ask for his license at first. Just told him to keep his hands on the wheel. Elias met his eyes. And how did that make you feel? I don't know, Dorian said. Like even if you're good, you still gotta prove it. The words were small. But they cracked something. Elias reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded slip of paper, Gloria's grocery list from months ago. He had never thrown it away. It was her last handwriting, simple and ordinary. Tomatoes, basil, sugar. He held it out. This isn't special to anyone but me, he said. But it reminds me of who I belong to. What matters. Sometimes, we need a reminder that we're more than what the world assumes. Dorian took the paper carefully, not quite understanding the gesture, but feeling the weight behind it. Elias smiled. When you get older, you'll find out that being seen, truly seen, is one of the bravest things we do. Dorian looked at the paper again, then back at Elias. Thank you. Thank you for asking, Elias replied. Not enough people do. They sat there a while longer. No rush. No reason to fill the silence. Eventually, Dorian's mother called him from across the hall, and he left, walking backward for a few steps as if reluctant to break the moment. Elias sat alone again. But this time, the hallway didn't feel empty. It felt like a bridge had been built. Not for crowds. Not for applause. Just for one boy who asked the right question. Outside, the church bells rang once. The sound stretched across the neighborhood, gliding over rooftops, echoing into alleyways. Elias rose from the bench, the paper gone from his hands now. He didn't feel lighter, but he did feel returned. To himself. To the memory of a life made not just by what you survived, but by what you passed forward when no one was looking. The Kroger on Mableton Street hadn't changed much. Same chipped red carts, same flickering light over aisle 6, same security guard by the front entrance who looked barely old enough to rent a car. Elias stood outside it once more, shoulders squared beneath his veteran's jacket, eyes steady on the glass doors that had seen too much and remembered too little. He didn't need groceries that morning. Not really. There was milk in the fridge. Oatmeal in the tin. Blood pressure meds tucked in the cabinet like obedient soldiers. But there was something unfinished here. Not in the dramatic sense. Not like a reckoning waiting to be declared. Something smaller. Something still. Inside the store, he moved without hesitation. He knew the layout by heart. Passed the floral display without pausing, nodded at Trinity behind the pharmacy counter, made his way toward the breakfast section with slow, deliberate steps. And there, in front of the oatmeal shelf, stood a man, mid-40s, light-skinned, face vaguely familiar. He looked up as Elias approached, a half-nervous smile tugging at his mouth. I think I've seen you before, the man said. Elias stopped beside him, turned slightly. You have, he replied. The man's smile faded into something more cautious, more careful. You're the guy from that thing, right? With the officer. Elias nodded, slowly. I am. The man fidgeted, then extended his hand. I just want to say I'm sorry. Not because I was part of it, but because I watched it happen on the news, and I didn't feel anything at first. It took a few days. I think that's worse in a way. Elias studied him, not with judgment, but with a kind of tired honesty that life teaches you when you've seen too many versions of the same moment. What made you feel it, eventually? The man shrugged, ashamed. My son asked me what I would have done if it had been my father. Elias didn't reply right away. He looked at the oatmeal, reached for the plain box, then turned back. You felt it late, he said. But you felt it. That's more than most. The man looked relieved, but not entirely. As Elias turned to walk away, he stopped himself, then looked back once more. "Next time," he said, "feel it sooner." By afternoon, he was back on his porch. The sun had started its slow descent, dragging long shadows across the walkway like spilled ink. Wind stirred the leaves into slow spirals. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the distant sound of a lawnmower and a child's laugh echoing faintly from across the street. On the table beside him sat a notebook, its pages filled with uneven handwriting, a mixture of grocery lists, reflections, and half-written letters never meant to be sent. One page in particular had been rewritten 3 times. This time it stayed. "To the ones who see us late, thank you for seeing us at all. To the ones who never look, we're still here. And to the ones like me, quiet, tired, waiting, we do not need the world to shout for us. We just need it to stop whispering when we walk into the room." He closed the notebook gently and slid it into a wooden box beside Gloria's favorite tomato magnet. He had no idea who would read it when he was gone. But someone would. They always did. 3 days later, the city council convened in a quiet vote. No cameras. No ceremony. Just 7 members seated in solemn agreement, their pens moving slowly as if they understood that ink sometimes carried more weight than speeches. The new ordinance passed unanimously. A quiet change, tucked into policy, coded into dispatch language, that required verification before sending law enforcement to respond to vague calls about suspicious persons. It was dubbed the Monroe Mandate. Not because Elias wanted it. He hadn't asked for any of this. But sometimes, justice doesn't knock on your door with a banner and a trumpet. Sometimes, it sits quietly beside you on the porch and listens first. Later that week, Trinity from the pharmacy stopped by Elias's house. She brought with her a bag of groceries and an envelope from her father, a retired police officer who had never spoken to Elias but had written a letter thanking him for his restraint, for his grace, and for standing taller than most men would have under a barrel of suspicion. Trinity stood awkwardly at the door as Elias read the letter. Then she added, "My dad said he was wrong. Back then. About a lot of things." Elias folded the letter and placed it on the table. "Then he's ahead of most," he said. "And that matters." On his last Sunday before fall arrived, Elias returned to the church. No fanfare. No announcements. He brought with him a small slip of paper, the same one young Dorian had tucked into his Bible weeks ago. On it, Dorian had written just one sentence. "I won't forget how you stood." It wasn't fancy. It wasn't polished. But it was enough. And so Elias sat once again on the back pew, not to be noticed, but simply to be among the living. The ones who remembered. The ones who were trying to do better, however slowly. As the service ended, he didn't rush to leave. He lingered in the sunlight pouring through the stained glass windows, letting it warm the creases of his face. Not everything had changed, but some things had. Enough to breathe differently. Enough to hope in inches instead of miles. Later that evening, Elias sat on his porch one final time that summer. In his hands, a warm cup of tea. On the table beside him, no newspaper, no television remote. Just the quiet hum of the world continuing, not perfectly, not justly, but forward. He watched a father teaching his son how to ride a bike on the sidewalk. Listened to the creak of the screen door from a neighbor's house. Smelled the beginnings of supper from someone's kitchen. Peace had not arrived in a parade, but it had returned, slowly, like a friend who knows how to knock softly. And to you, yes, you watching this story unfold, if you felt something along the way, if Elias reminded you of your grandfather, your neighbor, your father, or even yourself, then don't let it end here. Tell someone what you felt. Ask someone a hard question. See someone you've been overlooking. Because stories like Elias Monroe's do not survive on headlines. They survive on hearts that carry them forward. If this story stayed with you, if it stirred something quiet and real, then help us keep stories like this alive. Like this video. Share it with someone who still needs to listen. And subscribe to this channel for more stories that make you feel, not just scroll. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes, it speaks softly through the life of a man who simply refused to be erased.